This week on Great Chat, we discuss living a portfolio life. What is it, pros and cons, and how to make the transition. I'm Helen, and this week I'm joined by Ashley, my fellow portfolio life person. Great Chat is brought to you by Mercury, the fintech used by entrepreneurs through every stage of company building. We use Mercury to run this podcast and love recommending it to other founders and fund managers. Try it for yourself. Visit Mercury.com to join over 200,000 entrepreneurs who use Mercury to make managing their money unbelievably simple.
Hello.
Two-person format this week.
I saw a photo, and I don't know if it was AI generated or real, of a Tinder Subway ad that said, "May I meet you?" and then dash Bill Ackman. So I know we were talking about how this was a very low TAM joke initially, and maybe we should back up and give some context in case the TAM is still moderately sized. Billionaire investor Bill Ackman decided to do his part to help the youth of America, and specifically young men, be better able to meet women in the real world. And he shared a story of meeting his second wife after splitting from his first. It was actually kind of a weird story. I don't know, Helen, if you read it. It was something about how his friend wanted to introduce them, but she was with someone else. Anyways, but
he's very good at really getting the $8 a month, the ROI on that by just really taking up all of the characters in his tweets. So Bill Ackman's also, he's famous for many things at this point, but he's also now famous for writing really, really long tweets.
I think that's probably the only way he is known to younger generations.
Yeah.
He's just a Twitter poster at this point.
Because everyone has their own theory as to why, marriage is less and less desirable for young people, right? And you can blame anything. And so at least he offered a solution, even if it is a silly one or, whatever you might think of it.
It's Bill Ackman, Scott Galloway, and Jordan Peterson, who are the spiritual guides for young men. Aren't we lucky? Yeah, it's funny. I think, and it's not just marriage; it's dating and sex and all the things that
all the things are in a decline. Yeah, and I think the hypothesis, most people tend to agree that just being glued to our phones and addicted to our digital life, whether that's gaming or just spending too much time on the internet or YouTube or whatever, is a contributing factor to this. So I think the "May I meet you" is this sort of IRL, right? Just sort of push towards meeting in real life. And I don't know, maybe sex will happen as a result.
At the line, we'll see how long the line is from "May I meet you" to that end state.
All right, so Bill Ackman's back. Jeff Bezos is also back.
Oh, it's a good week for the billionaire men.
Well, Ashley, did you get any questions from your LPs? Why didn't you see this deal?
This is so funny because I saw a tweet along those lines. I bet all the LPs are asking, and GPs are scrambling to figure out how to rebuild their sourcing. I'm like, man, my LPs would be, if I invested, what were the terms of this? It was $6 billion at who knows what valuation. This is not my entry level.
Do you think that that's still considered a seed? Will Peter Walker at Carta be showing the average seed raises and valuations and account for this deal?
Yeah, I mean, it feels like the stages are becoming a little bit. We need to rebrand. I saw people when the new funding round that is supposedly in process for Mira Murati's Thinking Machines was announced to be valued at 50 billion post. Mm-hmm. People were 50 billion post for a pre-seed. And so, that's absurd.
Well, she's raised a couple rounds now, so maybe that would be
I know, but I think they meant more company stage.
100%. We still don't know what the product is, but...
Yeah, I think people are just pointing out the absurdity of what do you even call it when we're using that amount of capital as like a blunt instrument to just, have companies operate on a completely different playing field. So I don't know. I feel kind of relieved that as like a small fund with a mandate to invest actual early stage, like I just get to like sit these out and be a participant and not try to chase down Jeff Bezos.
Yeah, 100%. I think, I subscribe to this, like, the only alpha left in venture is conviction. And so, like, as you know, I invest super, super, super early, and it's like you can isolate the variables that you can control, and everything else, like how hypey or buzzy or expensive something gets in a consensus, sort of driven round, like those are elements that like I really cannot control. And so It's just been like an interesting way to see it play out in the most extreme ways. Like I think I was telling you guys about this deal last week that apparently is oversubscribed now, where the founder was raising $1 billion on 5 billion post and raised the whole thing in 5 days. And it's another model company, which is cool. Like I think people have hypotheses that either OpenAI has already won the race, or that in the future, or that maybe it's an incumbent like, Google or somebody's going to win the race. There will be one winner. And then other people have this thought that in the future there are going to be so many model companies, right?
Yeah.
And so this was a nice sort of like nod to the people who believe that, it's not a foregone conclusion on who the winners are. But anyways, they set out to raise $1 billion, and they did it, oversubscribed in 5 days. Like that's okay. On a 5 billion post. I was like, was that on a YC standard safe? Like was
Oh my gosh, I want to see the first safe where the cap is above $1 billion. That will be a special moment in this industry when everything has broken.
Yes, I'm sure we're close. We're close. Okay, and then another fun one that we were talking about in the group chat. So Row is a fintech company.
RHO, for those of you.
RHO, not the GLP-1 Serena Williams partnership. RHO.
Yep.
Yeah, Row is a fintech company, a New York-based one, I believe. I feel like I'm so Row, they first came on my radar. They actually acquired Capital, which was Jordy Hayes' company of TBPN fame. And then they acquired another company, Creative Juice, that we were investors in. And it seemed like they were doing this like fintech roll-up strategy. Cool. That might be like the thing, that they're going to do this like cool PE style roll-up. But still like, very New York based fintech. And then recently, like I think past 6 months, it feels like they are everywhere in San Francisco. And so I used to call Ramp Brex of the East, and now Ramp is also everywhere as well. So it's just been interesting to see like these fintech wars, but particularly Row, they have a promotion, which like if you move your banking, if you're a startup and you move your banking from, another provider, I don't think it's clear whether it has to be from like another fintech or a traditional bank over to Row, they'll give you an 8 sleep. And that is wild.
It's also so targeted.
And so niche. Yes. It's like, yes.
They know their target customer.
Yeah. Exactly. And I think the idea is that, people will be so grateful and they share, it's like the marketing of it will be worth the cost of these very expensive, mattresses. But like if you actually look, or if you talk to somebody who works at a traditional bank and you ask them how much they spend on customer acquisition and how much they spend on retention, like it's astronomical. So like banking is a great business, and, very quickly point to how much they're willing to spend to acquire a customer. I'm sure that these 8 sleeps are like nothing, right? Especially business customers.
Oh yeah. And they probably, they've baked that into the CAC. They've decided that is acceptable relative to like the incredible lifetime value. Cause like once you're on a bank, it's like pretty sticky. And yeah, like it's a clever campaign, because if they're targeting like longevity bro founders.
Totally.
8 sleep is like squarely in that wheelhouse.
To your point, it's like, they must be targeting extremely online solo founders because how do you split an 8 sleep? Like, there's like 4 co-founders. It's like, well, we only get one. So
about to make a very inappropriate joke.
Exactly. But like, yeah, very, very targeted and small TAM, but maybe worth it. Well, we are very loyal to our favorite fintech, Mercury. So
and they haven't even given us an 8 sleep, and we love them. So that really
exactly. That's.
I sleep well at night just knowing that my money is in Mercury. I don't need a special mattress.
Okay, let's move on to our big topic for this week, especially because it's just Ashley and I. So we joke that we are living a portfolio life, and we're trying to like make this phrase a thing. Like, I think I like mention it every opportunity that I can. But yesterday somebody actually said it to me, so I don't think that we're going to be attributed to the originals. Unfortunately, it was my former boss from Dropbox days, and she was telling me how her week looks, and then she's like, and that's the portfolio. And I was like, portfolio life. So, I think we want to talk about like, what is portfolio life? Why have this conversation now? Is it something we're seeing more and more of? And I don't know what your experience is, Ashley, but I do think more people are in transition between jobs, and that number will increase, whether it's layoffs, whether it's, whatever. Also life stage. I think we're kind of at the stage of life where people are kind of think about like, can I create a more flexible schedule sort of around the other parts of life? And what does that mean in terms of, weighing the options between having a full-time traditional job, right, where you're sitting at a desk all day versus something a little different. So I just, I'm getting more questions about it. I think you are too. And then, what are the pros and cons for you and me? We've been living this for a couple of years now, and sort of how have we managed it? So just very honestly looking at like what's been hard, what's worked for us.
Yeah, and maybe just like to be super crisp on the definition, there's like and we'll narrow this to tech because of course there are ways to do like a portfolio life across any fields, but like specifically within sort of the tech world, you can have your full-time operating role where you're all in one company, you have like a function. And that is where you not only have your income and your equity, but like
your benefits,
it's a big sense of your identity, camaraderie, like structure to your life, etc. Like it's kind of like built in for you. And then there's deciding to not do that or to do that and other things, I guess we should say. There's kind of like a sort of hybrid, which I did for a while. I was at Glossier. I started angel investing, advising. Helen, I know you did something similar when you were at AngelList, where you have your full-time job. So you have all of that, but then you decide, I'm going to have like a side hustle. And the portfolio piece, especially if we're being looking at this through like an economic lens, is like you have exposure to equity and to, or potential income streams beyond just your full-time job. And then there's like full portfolio, which is like no full-time job, like, a bunch of different things that you're working on. They might satisfy like different elements of what you want from work. Like one may be about cash flow. One might be about like equity exposure. One might be about brand building. But it's really just sort of like unbundling the full-time job. I feel like I'm actually still in that, even though I have a portfolio as a VC, I'm still very much like 110% of my energy goes to Coalition. And now I have a little bit that goes to Great Chat as well. So I feel like I don't know that I'm like the poster child of like true portfolio life, but I have done it in between Glossier and raising our first fund. So I'm excited.
Well, I think that's a good point, that portfolio life can often just be a transition into something more full time. So like my experience with portfolio life, I currently live it. I'd say very much so, but I also tried it and hated it and ran away the first time. So my first time was I left Plaid in September of 2019 with the intention of like, sort of exploring and finding a new career. And what that looked like for me was like, I'll do more angel investing, I'll take on some consulting gigs. And one of the companies that I was working with, what happened to be AngelList. And later on, I think pandemic, and I think the pandemic actually accelerated the number of people who sought portfolio life for one reason or another. But I struggled with just having so many different, projects, and I didn't love it, which is why, eventually I just joined AngelList full time. So I was, I was like a consultant at AngelList from like September to I think like April. But then I just joined full time, and because I was a little bit like, okay, phew, because that was a mess. And then like wound down all the, sort of open consulting gigs that I had. And now I'm living it again. I think when I decided to start a fund, leaving AngelList, like, the mechanics of starting a fund, like you don't raise that full fund on the first day you decide to go out and start a fund. It's like there's a long period where you're fundraising, and you don't have management fees to collect, so you don't have any money. And so I think oftentimes, and Ashley, I think this is what you did too, like you pick up some side hustles to be able to sort of like even out cash flow. And so I started to do that again. I started to work with startups, and because I feel very comfortable with how much exposure I have to early stage venture in terms of just like equity, I would do like a cash based compensation for a lot of these consulting gigs. And then you sort of figure out the upper bounds of like how many companies you can work with at any given time. And then, you figure out how to make it work.
Oh yeah, I found that out the hard way. I way overshot.
Yeah, and like it'll be very obvious, right? You're like, okay, I think a little too much, or okay, then you scale back and you're like, oh, I could probably take on one more. And so it's not, it's fluid. But I think the most common question that I get are from people who are thinking about that, but are currently, very much in a full-time, W-2 salary and benefits sort of role, and they're just kind of like asking and curious, like, what's it like? How do you manage? Do you put structure around it? Like, well, I do this on this day, and then I only do this on this day, or I, go into the office, and they know that when I'm physically in the office is when they get my time dedicated to this, but outside, I'm not available. So it's, the questions that I get are usually from people who are in a full-time thing, right? And asking themselves, like, could I make this work? Not just from like a, stitching together like different sources of income, but like, can I make this work just from like a time management or lifestyle standpoint?
Yeah. And I think the challenge is there's no blueprint, right? Like, I mean, individual people have figured out what works for them, but what worked for me might not work for you. I am a big advocate for trying this at some point in your career. Like you, Helen, I actually didn't love it when I did it. Like I love collaborating. It felt transactional. I hated pricing my time and expertise. Like, I mean, venture is amazing because I can just like give away my time. Like, incentives are so aligned, but it was so empowering because the thing that it taught me is that I do not need a full-time job to support myself. There are interesting projects to work on. I learned a lot about how I would structure things differently if I ever did this again. And it actually allowed me to be much more risk-on in my career and decide to raise a fund and take that leap. And take that leap even knowing, like if I couldn't continue on that path and I needed some transition time down the road, I could always go back to doing this sort of more like portfolio approach. I think it's incredibly empowering. It's funny, I have a friend who just left a job and she sort of like took that leap ahead of having anything lined up. And I was the one being like, you are going to have no problem finding people who want your time and expertise. I think if you are, and maybe this is a really important qualifier, if you have a great reputation as an operator and you have some sexy company names on your resume, I think it's actually like pretty easy to find people who like want your time and expertise. I do think there's a question of like, what is the right point in your career to take this leap? because you want to do it at a point where you have a bit of a reputation, where you're not going out and like having to like look for opportunities, where you have like a network and word of mouth. Or for me, when I announced I was leaving Glossier, and I really did not know I was going to raise a fund, like a couple months later, I just tweeted it, and I had my entire, I said yes to the things that came my way that I wanted to do. And I more than filled out my capacity. And so that's not to say that's like what everyone needs to do, but as an example, if I had done that 10 years prior, it would have been crickets.
Another like empowering thing about portfolio life is, unlike a job where, let's say you take it and then you're like, oh no, what have I done? And then you have to start thinking about the story if you leave, or, it looks like a short tenure, another blip on your resume. It's like, I think one of the most empowering things about, doing fractional work or a consulting project is like, you can decide whether you extend it and you continue to keep them on. Or if you're like, when this project is done, like I'm going to move on to other projects. And, I think for me, AngelList ended up turning into a full-time job, but I did not go into it with that intention. It just like was a fit on both sides. And you hear of a lot of people who are just sort of like, consulting or doing fractional things with different companies, and then they end up finding their like forever job that way too. So I don't think that there's downside in thinking of like portfolio life as almost like this sampling of different companies and opportunities, especially if it's like maybe a little bit different of an industry, to just feel like, do I like working in crypto? Yeah, well, a good, you could go join full time at a crypto company, or you could just like do a little bit of fractional work for a crypto startup, and then, sort of immerse yourself in that world, and like that gives you some data. And so, I think that there are really, really useful parts of doing it as well. Let's talk about some of the hard things, because I think one thing that I mentioned to you and Sally, because I think we all live portfolio lives just to some degree, is like the hard parts in my experience have been around identity. And there is less of a blueprint on how to navigate some of these things, especially if you are somebody whose identity is so closely coupled to this place that you work. And that's no judgment. I think, especially living in San Francisco, it's literally, you meet someone at a coffee shop, you're like, hi, what do you do? It's like, that's just like it's like an unfortunate thing, but it's a real thing. And so, the equivalent of that is like, you get invited to go to a cool conference, and they send you the link to register, and it says like title and company, and you sort of like freeze up, and you're like, do I put my consulting LLC? Do I put the company where I'm spending the most time? Like, will I get rejected? If this is on my badge, will people take me seriously? I think that is an experience that, is sort of the thing that nobody prepares you for. And also like the farthest you have to fall, especially if you have been, a company person for, a very long period of time, if that makes sense.
That resonates a lot. And I'm actually even like reflecting on, maybe this is a key difference with San Francisco and New York, because I was going to say when I left Glossier, I was in New York, but that's not even true. I was like literally on a road trip during the pandemic. So everything felt up in the air, but I did ultimately come back to New York. I think that's real. I think it's another reason why it's helpful to do it a little bit later in your career, when maybe that piece matters a little bit less to you, when you feel like you have like a sense of yourself in the place of the ecosystem separate from your latest role. I think the piece that I struggled with the most, like far and away, was just like loneliness. I really love like collaborating with people, working with people. I get so much energy from that. And I found that like the client relationship didn't quite satisfy that need. And so it's funny, I went back and I like found a tweet from September of 2011. So like a month after I'd left Glossier, where I was like musing on like
2021.
With you on 2021. What did I say? 2011?
Yeah.
No, I'm not that old. 2021, where I was musing on like if you unbundle a full-time role, like what are all the things you have to find elsewhere? And like a big part of it was like camaraderie and purpose, and like where does your sense of like motivation and drive come from? And I got some of that at the individual project level, but it did feel like a little bit more transactional to me. And so that was the piece. And actually I got to experiment with like doing some projects with other people. I did a really big, fun, like comms project with like 2 other people. I probably can't name the company, but like a big tech company. And that was so fun because it felt like we were a team and we were doing it together. But that piece, and I know a lot of other people struggle with that piece as well. If you are a team player and a team person, suddenly you are like, the CEO of your own tiny little kingdom, and you're going to have to do some sort of unnatural things to rebuild that part of your work.
Yeah, so my experience is a little different because I think the way that I engaged companies was pretty consistent. So I would be like offering to set up the scaffolding for like the marketing and comms function, meaning like, okay, here's what I think the structure should look like, right? And here are the first few roles, and then I will help hire that team, right? And then I would be like this, sort of fractional interim person, and then we would eventually hire like my replacement. And so because I did that pretty consistently, I did that with 4 companies, I was naturally sort of like growing a team around me. Sometimes we'd bring people from other parts of the org. So I always I had a team, but it's different to not be, like a real part of the team and sort of like just be fractional. So I definitely, the loneliness thing definitely resonates, even if you're sort of like dropped into sort of more of a team function. I think that as an emerging manager too, like it can get quite lonely, even if you have partners. I've experienced it both ways. It's just this kind of like, no, like you have to set your goals, and then you have to work towards those goals, and then also hold yourself accountable on your progress towards those goals, right? Like, you talk about the freedom of not having a boss or a dashboard at work where they're tracking your progress or needing to like share status updates or reporting. If that's the environment that you have been used to, and, I think that this is where operators and investors, we talk a lot about like, how their lives are different and their modes of operations are so different. I think if you're a longtime operator, you're just very used to these like structures in place where there are goals and then there's accountability to the goals, right? In portfolio life, it's like you have to say, this month I need to bring in this much money, right? Therefore, I need to have this many projects or bring on a new client or something like that. Similar to raising a fund, it's like I need to have this much money, so I need to raise this much money, and it's all of those things. But it's like no one's holding you accountable but you, and that is I think a very unique portfolio life experience. Where it's not so much in the bucket of loneliness, but it's just like, well, I have to play many roles.
Yeah, it's like no one is coming to save you, but even more than that, like no one really cares that much. Like, no one else is like in the trenches with you except for your poor spouse who has to hear about it all the time. And so, I think it's interesting. When I say loneliness too, it's like the key, like, I don't know, the thing that I have found matters the most to me is like energy. Like, how am I spending it? Where am I getting it? And, like, I think when you're part of a team or when you have like a founder who's super inspiring, like there's a lot of transfer of energy that enables you to like run at things. And when you are doing, whether it's portfolio life or, a solo GP at a fund, you have to generate that for yourself. And that's like a very different equation. As someone, Coalition has unique structure, as you know. I'm the only full-time GP, and then I have 3 amazing partners, but they're running companies full-time and investing part-time. And so I do spend like, a lot of time with my own energy levels. And so I have had to invest in like finding ways to like really build my network and ecosystem around me and figure out like how do I structure my days so that I do things that give me energy and ideas that I can then spend over here on the things that don't. And, now I'm almost 4 years into this phase of my career, and I think I've like figured it out, but it was a really big adjustment for me, that piece specifically.
Yeah, and you just said 4 years in, and I feel like post-COVID, time has just done strange things, because I mean, when you would say, "Oh, I've spent 4 years at a company," right? You're just like, "Wow, full vesting." It's like that's like a good tour of duty. And I think that when you are living portfolio life, like, I don't know, in many ways, 4 years just goes by so quickly because you're just busy. And, there are new projects coming in and out, and sort of like there's just activity in a way that is different. I'm not suggesting at all that there isn't activity when you work at a company. But yeah, it's just different, the time scale.
There's plenty of activity at company, but I think the thing that I found with operating was it was always obvious to me what I should be working on. Like, it was kind of like built into the role and the company's goals. And I think when you have, whether it's as like a fund manager or if you're doing like full portfolio life, like you have a lot of autonomy and there's a lot of room for creativity. And you could spend a day doing any number of things. You can focus on the near term, you can focus on the long term, you can focus on specific projects, you can focus on like investing and building your brand, or right, like there's so many different ways to spend your time, which is both exciting and also like, very challenging when you're used to like the cocoon of company structure. Okay,
well, good luck with portfolio life. I think everyone should experience it, and especially women, if I'm being totally honest. I do get comments about like, "Oh, how do you do that? And how do you do this?" And it's like, well, sometimes, I get to create big holes in my calendar around certain things. And
it's funny, I like work a lot more than I did when I was in a company, and I've always been a hard worker, but I have full autonomy. And I will always take like autonomy and hard work over like more rigidity. No one's telling me I have to do 996. I'm probably doing it, but I'm doing it on my own terms. So
exactly. Same number of hours at the end of the week, but just schedule the way you want.
It like can flow a little bit more with the rest of your life. Amazing. Well, Helen, I will see you next week.
See you next week.
Bye. Thank you.